And welcome to Resource Stage Study Hall for February 2023. It is the last day of February, and we are going to be talking about wireless microphones today. My name is Carl, and I'm here at Horizon Solutions with Matthew. How's it going, Matthew?
That's going all right. Nice to be here in that. It's last day of February. I can't wait for March to come. I'm sick of the snow. I'm sure everyone else is.
And the ice storms.
Yes.
So today we are talking about wireless microphones. We have clients of all shapes and sizes calling us about wireless microphones regularly. And, you know, it's interesting because everybody's like, oh, I got to have everything on wireless because our whole world is wireless these days. Whether it's our laptops are wireless or whether it's our cell phones are wireless, we're streaming music wirelessly. Everything is wireless. So they figure, well, all of our microphones should be wireless as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that is one of those phone calls we get. So if somebody calls up and they say, hey, Matthew, I need wireless microphones for my show. What do you start with? What's kind of your first question?
First thing I want to know is more about the application and how they're using it. Is this going to be for a musical where they're moving around a lot? Is this going to be just kind of speech, just like an assembly or something like that?
Right.
So it's a lot to do with the application of where they're going to use it and how they're going to use it.
Right. So that's an interesting point. So, you know, we get these phone calls and people say things like, why can't I just use Bluetooth? You know, I remember having an earbud that was a Bluetooth earbud, right? And I could drive along, and or my headphones might be Bluetooth. Why can't I use Bluetooth and have, you know, 12 kids, 20 kids on stage, and they're all using Bluetooth? Well, Bluetooth technology isn't designed to work that way.
No.
And there's all these limitations of distance and so on and so forth. And yes, I am aware of the fact that technology is getting better, but it's still a consumer technology first, and it's not a professional technology. It's not a technology that is going to work in mission critical sort of applications. It's really designed that, you know, if the music blips for a second when I'm listening to Stevie Wonder in the living room, I don't care. You know, I might look over and go, oh, what happened there? And then I just ignore it. But if you're doing a show and your microphone drops out like that, that's not cool. That's not good.
All.
We'll get the phone call.
Yeah, exactly. That's
we
why we ask these questions to our customers and clients, because we want to make sure we are saving them from any issues like that.
Yep.
And we want to give you guys some tips to make sure you don't run into any issues like that either.
Right. Okay. So right out of the gate, what's the application? And if the application is a good number of people on stage, if it's something people are paying to be at, if it's something where they've rehearsed and this is an important show for them, then we need to be staying away from consumer grade electronics and we need to be looking at professional grade. That doesn't mean you need to be spending $10,000 per wireless system, but it does mean that you need to move away from something that you might see on Amazon for $50.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's a lot about the reliability depending on your show. If it's something like a play that you've rehearsed and you have one chance to get it right, it's a lot different from filming a video where you can film it take after take. We want to make sure that you go with that professional grade quality microphone or for your application.
Right. So then the question becomes, what different types of wireless microphones? And it's funny because we get phone calls from people sometimes and they just say, I need a new wireless. And we say, okay, what kind of wireless? And often they're talking about something like this.
Yeah, so they're looking at a handheld microphone. Just they're thinking for something for speech, for house of worship or that, or an assembly like I was saying earlier. But there's tons of different microphones to consider. There's earset microphones and headset microphones like what we're wearing today. There's lapel and lavalier microphones. All depends back to that application. That's going to bring me to what type of microphone they're looking for.
Okay, so what is the best application for this kind of microphone?
For a handheld microphone, I'd typically use that for speech, vocals, things like that. And when it's being passed around a lot, it's a great for like Q&A sessions and that. On-the-spot interviews, they're really great for that type of situation. Right.
And this kind of microphone is great in that it's fairly forgiving. I can move close to the microphone, further away. If I have to cough or something like that, I can, I'm further away from the mic. If I need to have two people at the microphone, then this is, that's better than two people around this microphone.
Absolutely.
So these are very, very versatile, but they're not always the right thing if you are putting on a performance of some sort, like a musical or a play or something of that sort.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you quickly mentioned that we have options like lavalier mics.
Yep.
Now, I know that some of the first lavalier mics I ever saw were things like television broadcasts or news broadcasts, that kind of thing. And that seems to make sense for lav mics.
Yeah, it's great to use lav mics for that situation. Even like what we're doing today, we're not moving around too much. It's something where we can have it clipped onto our lapel, and we can have that conversation. We're not going to hear too much of the clothes rustling or things like that. But like I said, when we are in a situation where it's a musical and people are running from stage left to stage right, you don't want to be hearing all of that noise. You want something like a headset microphone that's going to be directed towards the mouth, towards that source of the audio.
Right. And I think that's what it comes down to with every mic, whether you're talking about microphones like wireless mics or you're talking about just microphones in general, that it's always about getting the mic close to the source of the sound. And so when it comes to something like this, these really thin ear set microphones, then these mics get as close as you can get to the voice, to that source. So what about, we see when we work with some of our professional clients, like say the Grand Theater here in town or Stratford or somewhere like that, they do not often wear an ear set mic like this. They will often have a mic hidden somewhere. And it's interesting because it's often the same kind of microphone as far as the capsule is the same, but it's a mic that is now stuck into a wig, stuck into a hat, that sort of a thing. A really great example is if you go to, I think it's still streaming on Disney+. If you take a look at the Broadway performance of Hamilton, most of the people in Hamilton have microphones that are, they're up in their hairline, they're in a wig, that sort of thing. Except that the fellas on stage who are bald, they're wearing ear set microphones because they have no hair or hat to put the mic into. So it depends. You have to figure out which application is best.
Absolutely, and that makes a very good point as well, because with those lavalier microphones that are going through through wig lines and things like that, they're a lot more fragile too.
Yes.
So you can put makeup and things like that on them, but only to a point where something like this, the handheld microphone, it can take a beating. It's designed to take a lot more abuse than something like this is.
Right. I think it's always important to consider how much can people see and what is the point? Like, the reality is that when you're doing a lot of theatrical performances, sometimes we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, can I hide the microphone? Well, it's more important that people be able to hear their kids or hear the performance than it is to hide the mic, I think. And maybe, I might have a different opinion on that than some people, but it seems to me that I would rather that microphone be close to the source, be visible, but that the student or the actor, the actress is able to be heard throughout the entire space. That, to me, seems more important.
Absolutely. Suspension of disbelief is one thing, but it's depending on how practical that is for your performance.
Right. And I think we should also make sure that we note that you mentioned that microphones can also be painted or makeup on them. Before you do that to a rental microphone, whether it's from us or somebody else, make sure you talk to them about it, because that could be a bit of an issue.
Absolutely. Talk to the people you are getting these microphones about on what you can and can't do with them.
Yep.
We have heard it all, and the intentions it's very important.
Yeah. If you're going to do Shrek or you're going to do Aladdin, we've had microphones come back in green or blue, and that's not really great. Okay, so we've talked about the different types of microphones in the application. What about the number of microphones? How does that affect things? Like if somebody says, well, I've got 12 kids on stage or I've got 25 kids on stage, how does that affect things?
So it can depend on a number of things. So it could be how big your budget is how limited you are for the microphones. That's an easy question that we first come into. But it could be the application of, is this meant for miking a choir with a group of kids? Or is this going to be a microphone that needs to be on one person? Is it something that can be passed around?
Right.
The number of microphones, ideal. We'd love to have one microphone for every single source of audio or person speaking.
Sure.
But things like budgets, things like power, even where you're able to put all your microphones, there's a lot of things that go into it to consider.
Right. Okay. And I think that it's important to consider that when you are using a number of wireless microphones, you need to manage those mics. So these are kind of expensive.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that if you have a bunch of them that are being used by your performers, then how are you going to manage who's going to put them on and off, who's going to take care of them before and after performance, whether that's rental ones or purchase. You need to make sure that you're managing that. There's also things like batteries and the consumables that are associated with these mics. So there's batteries, but there's also windscreens. Depending on what kind of performance you're doing, you might want a windscreen, just a little tiny one on the mic or on the lav mic. Then there's also things like the clips. So there are clips that go along with the cables or with a cable for a lav. And when those things get lost, they're way more expensive than what people think they should.
Absolutely.
It's easy to look at that stuff and think, oh, I can just get that at the dollar store. No, that's not the case.
Some of these consumables are made specifically for this exact unit, and it could be a unit that's not even made anymore in that. So things can get costly, and that brings us that we need somewhere to store this investment properly.
Absolutely. When we're talking to an elementary or high school principal, and they say, okay, we think we've got enough budget to be able to buy 1, 2, 3, 12 wireless mics, whatever it is. One of the next things I will say to them is, how are you going to package it? How are you going to protect this investment? How are you going to make sure that everything has a place that you can put it back into? Because if there's a spot for each of the pieces to go into, then it's more likely that people are going to put them back in those spots.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about an investment of maybe it's $500 or $600, or maybe it's more like $5,000 or $6,000, making a purchase of another $500, $1,000, $1,200, whatever it is, to properly package up this equipment so that there's somewhere for the things to go, it's insurance.
Absolutely. And especially if it's somebody else's equipment, that if you're renting, whether that's Horizon, whether that's another company, regardless, you want to have that insurance for your stuff. It's about keeping it not just safe for yourself, but out of hands of somebody who shouldn't be using it.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that plays a big role when we're in schools and things like that. I was a really techie kid. I wanted to tinker around with things. Maybe that's not always the best idea. Well, that's why we want to keep it safe.
We love working with kids who have a desire to get involved with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the truth is that some of those kids are really, really responsible with, okay, what am I going to do with this? Where does it go? But sometimes they're working away on something, and then something else is really important. They run over there and they take care of that, and these things get left. And again, if there's somewhere where it should go, then that's super important. I feel like we're taking a long time talking about that, but it is such an important part of owning and renting and using wireless equipment.
Absolutely. Yeah, it comes at a cost, and we want to ensure that cost.
Right.
So when we're talking about storing that equipment, where are we going to store it? And is there any reason that we should store it in any specific ways?
Right. So, you can get into casing, you can, take different things. Microphones in general, for the most part today, are not nearly as susceptible as they used to be for things like climate. So, sometimes people say to us, well, is it okay if it's in the trunk of my car overnight or something? It didn't used to be that was the case. Like, it used to be that it was much bigger of a deal. Now, not so much. Yeah. So as long as you've got the equipment in some sort of casing that can go in a, dry spot, then you're probably in good shape. But we should talk a little bit about when you're setting up the equipment, what does that look like? Because in some of our systems that we've worked on with different types of schools, a cabinet will get mounted on the side of the stage, or sometimes in a tech booth sort of an application if it's an auditorium sort of an application at a school. And that's great, except that we need to think about where are the antennas relative to the transmitter. So in a handheld transmitter, the antenna is typically on the bottom. So as I'm moving that around, that is emitting a radio frequency, whether it's digital or analog, it's still a radio frequency that's coming out of that. And that needs to get to these antennas.
Yeah.
Okay. But as I'm sitting here and my belt pack is on my right-hand side behind me. The receiver for these microphones is over there. So any of the radio frequency that's coming off of this belt pack is emanating all over, and it's going through me, it's going through you, it's kind of, it's going to be going through this table.
Yeah.
it's going to be bouncing off the walls and the other things around us so that it can get to that antenna. Now, yes, wireless technology is great and it's improving all the time, and you can go through some construction materials. But again, when you're dealing with more and more wireless and you want it to be reliable, then you need to make sure that wherever you have your receivers and the antenna for those receivers, you're putting it in a spot that is as close to line of sight as you can get it. If you're taking everything and putting it in a steel box because Matthew and Carl said you need to make sure it's safe, yes, but there are also ways of remoting those antennas. And that's the kind of thing that we can help with, and that we can help with our schools and our high school clients to design a system so that it works really well that way.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of really important things to consider when it comes to messing with radio waves and frequencies.
Right.
That it's difficult because it's something we can't really see. So we're relying on this technology to make sure we do it right. And like you said, we want it to be reliable. So we are always happy to help our clients with planning out this system to be the perfect one for their application.
Absolutely. And I should just point out that, you know, and I want to be careful how I say this. I think that we do a pretty good job of trying to treat our clients right when it comes to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think there are other people in this industry that do the same thing. But sometimes if you're going somewhere that's really more of a place that's not, that renting out wireless mics is not one of their primary things. Instead, they might rent out guitars and keyboards and drums at the same time. Sometimes they're not necessarily thinking through what's going to happen when I have a dozen wireless working together.
Absolutely.
Are they going to interact well together? That is something that we spent a fair amount of time doing, frequency allocation to make sure that these channels will work together. It's something to think about. If you're watching this and you're maybe in British Columbia or something of the sort, you're not going to rent from Horizon. But make sure that whoever it is that you're renting or purchasing from, that they are willing to help you do frequency allocation to make sure, and coordination, I should say, frequency coordination to make sure that you are getting the right frequencies to work together for your application and in your space.
Absolutely, yeah. You want to ask all of the questions that any information can help. Speaking from being on this receiving end of these phone calls, I want to hear every single piece of detail that might pertain to this customer or client's application.
Right.
If it's a bunch of microphones and the amount of microphones they're using, that comes into talking about frequency allocation and making sure that's being distributed properly.
Right. All right. I think that's it. I think we've covered, you know, the basics of using wireless microphones, or the things you should be considering with using wireless microphones on your school stage.
Absolutely. And if you have any questions or anything more that we didn't cover today, please absolutely call in. It's 509-453-3368.
Yep.
And Carl, myself, we've got a whole team of professionals here who are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for watching, and we will catch you at the next Resource Stage Study Hall.
Take care.